I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. All right, we have a super fun episode today. We have a conversation with Dr. Chrissy Guidry, who is a trauma surgeon and just an amazing human who does a ton with advocacy for for everyone really who is trying to build a family and who may also happen to be in medicine. And so this is just a wonderful conversation we're going to have candidly to talk about clean living and how we can clean up our minds, clean up our homes, clean up our bodies, and really clean up our relationships too, so that we can really engage in this process in the best way possible.
I love it. And just for anyone listening out there, we're going to be posting this on both of our podcasts. And, for my whole body optimism listeners, this is just so exciting that I get to speak and have this conversation with Dr. Erica Bove. She is an REI and a fertility coach, which if you don't know what REI is, and you probably are not in the fertility world, but you need to know reproductive endocrinologists have a huge impact on the world of when patients like me have issues getting pregnant and we need some assistance, whether it be just the logistics. It's who you go to. It's like if you had a heart condition, you went to a cardiologist. This is who you go to whenever you have fertility problems and things come up like that. So I'm excited for the conversation today.
Yes, absolutely. And so tell me, so I, as you said, I'm a fertility coach and a fertility physician. I was a physician first. And then as I was getting into my work, specifically with women physicians, but really with all women professionals, I just found that, making that transition from being a physician to being a patient is super complicated. Like in 1 hour, you're on the other side of the equation. Then it's almost like you kind of cross over this fence and you're like, wait, I'm the one providing the care and now I'm the one receiving the care. It's like this very dynamic situation. And, with every other thing in life, right? And on the path of medicine, it's like, okay, you work hard and then you get a result, right?
Yep.
The fertility journey could not be more opposite, right? You can do every single thing. You can go to every appointment. You can be on all the supplements and, have the best exercise regimen and all those things. And at the end of the day, like you talk about in a lot of your podcasts and writings, like it's a possibility and it's not guaranteed. And so, I'd love to sort of talk about that sort of paradox of like what it's like to be in a situation of, from your own, you're so generous with your own experience. Like, what is it like to be in a situation where the equation is not work harder and then get what you want, but you kind of have to think outside the box and figure out some other ways of going about this.
Yeah, that's so important that you bring that up because there's so many healthcare professionals that are just striving for excellence. And I think that's ingrained in us from, maybe even before medical school. We go to medical school, it's like you study this, you go to this, you do this practical, and you get this result. And you get congratulated. You match into a program. You get these good reviews. You have all these things, and then you get to this point in your life where you're like, okay, well, the natural progression is, okay, I'm going to get my career, then I'm going to meet someone, then I'm going to have a baby, And when that doesn't happen the way that you had anticipated to, you kind of there's a lot of self-harm in that, emotionally, because you're like, wait, like I have proved to myself and the world that if I worked hard enough, I can achieve X, Y, and Z. How come I am now trying to have my own baby and I'm doing clean eating, acupuncture, pelvic PT, and of course the most unhelpful advice ever is just go on a vacation. Just don't stress, all these different things. And honestly, even REI is telling me, okay, maybe you should back off and you shouldn't be a trauma surgeon anymore. And I think what along the way I had to realize, and this was through my own fertility coach and a lot of spiritual coaching and things like that, is really the stressors in life should maybe they should be avoided. There's some of them that you can avoid by making conscious decisions. But honestly, it's not to avoid them completely because we would be ignorant to do that.
Yeah.
It is to develop mechanisms of how we can change our nervous system, our emotional guidance system, for us to respond in a way that is so much more mindful, so much more emotionally mature, that we can use those experiences, those stressors, to actually grow and change the way we think and the way people act around us.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
like it's just it's a mind-blowing experience. and
Yeah.
and and really when I realized that, I started realizing over and over how this fertility journey is happening for me. And I
Yes.
think
Oh,
that
that's so powerful. That is so powerful.
yeah, and like and whenever I coach people that are in the fertility side of things, and most of my clients are just wanting to clean up their lives. They
Yeah.
want better longevity. They want more vitality in life. They want to feel better. And and it really comes down to what has happened in your life that has allowed you to let this new door open up.
That's right. I'm a divorced person. And although I would never wish that on any single human in this planet,
Sure.
I say it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I was so stuck and stagnant in my own growth. And by my life truly shattering into 1,000 pieces, I had to look and say, okay, how is this going to go back together? What needs to be created new? And I'm just so grateful for that experience now. And hey, it still causes a tremendous amount of pain in my life, but what you start to realize is that the pain and the beauty, they kind of coexist in this
Mm,
very, and like the people that I've met, through my own process, my own journey, it's like I never would have met those people. I never would have
yeah.
had that growth. And so again, would I, choose to go through door one, again,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah,
that
yeah.
would it's but you're right. These things happen for us. And I always tell my clients and my patients, like, spoiler alert, this is not going to be the last hard thing that happens. It's
Yeah.
this is an exercise in how do we handle hard things? What
Yeah.
resources do we need to pull in? What judgments do we need to set aside so that we can then, when the next hard thing happens, we're like, oh, guess what? Like, I've been through hard territories. I know how to handle these things. And we're a more evolved version of ourselves, you know?
Yeah, totally. Totally. I want to ask you because I know we should talk about different ways of how to get pregnant because
Uh-huh.
I know a lot of people have reached out to me about donor eggs, surrogacy, even IUI and IVF even. Some people are very against IVF, and because I think they just don't have enough education and knowledge about it, or they haven't talked to anybody. They haven't heard expertise on it. So,
Sure.
can you tell the listeners a little bit about if I were your patient coming in that is, later in their career and they wanted to get sort of quote unquote screened for infertility, what kind of steps would you take them through as far as like labs or whatever?
Yes, absolutely. So, my thinking on this is that time is not on our side when it comes to fertility. So we always want to do as many things in parallel as possible. So you might take the approach, oh, we'll do this. And if that's normal, then we'll do this. That is not how I function. I say infertility is not usually one giant thing. It's usually a few things that line up to keep people subfertile. And so let's check what we can of all the things we can. There's still things that are being developed and things that are going to come out in the next 10, 20 years, of course. But
Oh,
I think of things in like buckets to kind of keep things simple. So I think of the ovary bucket, right? So that's going to be the egg reserve testing that looks at how is a person doing for their age in terms of egg number. Now, the hard part is none of these are qualitative tests. So they're not going to say anything about egg quality. And I think that's
totally.
really the holy grail. But, I can say, okay, for a 40-year-old woman, you're on the good side of the numbers or the not so good side of the numbers, and that can influence the counseling. So what are those tests? Anti-Mullerian hormone is a blood test. That is an egg number test. I'm dating myself, but I gave my grand rounds as a second year resident because nobody even knew what it was back then. But now it's became like, I know, like the mainstay of care for egg number. And that really also tells us response to medications if people end up getting a treatment cycle or more than that. And then there's also the follicle stimulating hormone and the estrogen. Those tests need to be drawn at the same time. They need to be drawn at a certain point in the cycle to be interpreted. Many people don't know that. They're generally like a seesaw. When one goes up, the other goes down. And so generally speaking, I think of our bodies like a thermostat. When the ovaries are struggling, the brain then starts like sort of revving up the system and say, hey, turn up the temperature. So the brain temporarily works harder for the ovaries to do their job. And so I can get a window into the communication between the brain and the ovaries when I can check those two tests. And then there's the ultrasound. So there's basically like an internal ultrasound that looks at the ovaries. It's nice if they look like chocolate chip cookies, right, with lots of follicles. But if they don't look that way, that can suggest a low egg number. And also it's kind of like the AMH look at response to medication. So that's, like you say in your podcast, that is extremely simple technology. That is a blood test and an ultrasound. We're not talking like invasive cardiac screening here. This is like really simple stuff. So that's the first thing. If there is somebody who has a male partner with sperm, then we get what's called a semen analysis. Thankfully, in COVID, we had this idea where maybe men should produce sperm at home. So if, that's a lot less awkward than coming into the fertility clinic. So there was ways that you can even take a cup, bring it to your home, produce the sperm sample at home, bring it back into the clinic. And that's just, it's a super simple thing to do. I will say many men are often reluctant to do it, but it's truly just pretty straightforward in terms of what that is. And that looks at sperm number, motility, and shape as well. And then, there's that sort of anatomical testing in terms of the uterus and the fallopian tubes. Not everybody needs the full shebang to make sure all the tubes are open and connected and everything, but really just an anatomical assessment to say, okay, does the uterus overall look normal? Are there anything poking into the uterus that would act like an IUD? Are there any blockages anywhere? And, is there any ovarian masses, like anything that looks like the structure itself would make it harder to get pregnant or stay pregnant? And then there's that sort of big bucket of like preconception labs. And so just like in your, talking about clean eating and all those things, we want to make sure that the human is optimized to be a pregnant person. So complete blood count, thyroid, rubella, chickenpox, measles now, because measles has taken a resurgence. And also just general infectious disease testing is a good sort of matter. Sometimes I add on a vitamin D as well. So just, these are very basic screening tests. I usually get them all up front, but then I have a person or a couple come back and I'm like, okay, these are the data. This is where things may not be connecting because, to your point about your first question about like, what are the different ways people can get pregnant? That data then starts the springboard for where things may not be connecting if somebody's having infertility, and then sort of a tailored approach to what that person might need and what options exist.
Now, I'm curious because, I do a couple of posted a couple of podcasts about this, and I talk about this is the gut microbiome. And I'm curious, is that something that is on sort of one of those buckets, or is that something that later in their journey, if they request it, or how does that kind of work in your clinic?
That's a great question. So, I think we are at the point with a lot of this fertility knowledge and therapy where sometimes the things that we can test, we don't quite know what to do with those results as of yet. And so the same thing with the vaginal microbiome, the uterine microbiome, does having an IUD influence that in a negative way? Like we have all these questions and we can do a biopsy and say like, this is the smattering of what we see. But in terms of how we handle that, it's really complex because there aren't a ton of really good data, well-designed studies that show us exactly what we should do in those situations. And so I will say it often is after people have, a few unsuccessful cycles where then people start to look and say, okay, well, let's grasp at straws because we sort of don't really know what this means, but maybe it could sort of have an impact. And so I really hope that that's in that category of things that we'll see over the next several years in terms of like a little bit more guidance in terms of what to do. I very much tell my patients and my clients that intuitive eating is so powerful because it is not a one size fits all thing. I can eat the same thing as you, and we would process that totally differently. And so, really keeping a diary, figuring out what foods make people feel strong, what foods drain people's energy. With PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, there's certain guidelines around carbohydrates and protein and sort of different combinations of those things. But I'm curious your perspective. What have you found in terms of the gut microbiome in terms of helping your people or even yourself?
For myself and my people, I personally take a spore biotic twice a day. And I know I've spoken to a lot of gastroenterologists about this, and they have said that maybe that's overkill. But I know that whenever I'm not on this spore biotic, maybe it's a placebo thing in my mind, but I do feel like my gut doesn't feel as good. I feel less bloating whenever I'm on it. But then also, I tailor my diet around, feeding my gut microbiome. Like my whole, eating capacity during a day. And what I coach people to do is, go toward foods that are non-bloating, non-gut disruptive things. I practice the 80-20 lifestyle. So, I do have my 20% where, I go off the deep end sometimes with stuff. But, typically my day doesn't include gluten, especially in the United States because, of all the tainted gluten out there. I totally believe that's true.
Yep.
And I stick more with sweeteners like honey, maple syrup, coconut sugar, things of that nature that are more simple and really foods that have simple ingredients.
Yes.
To me, the more simple they are, the more cleaner it is for your whole body and your mental capacity. You're operating in a better stance, and your gut's happy. The gut brain axis I think, is a big thing,
Yes.
and especially talking to surgeons. I just recently presented and had a lot of people ask me a lot of questions about it at a conference. Just talking about what you're eating when you're on call. Like that is so important because if we're feeding our body trash, how are we expected to treat our patients less than trash?
Great
Like
point.
it's not even sometimes because a lot of physicians, they're like, oh, we're doing it for the patient. We're doing it for the patient. Well, take care of yourself for the
Yeah.
patient and feed your body cleaner things, feed the gut microbiome, which is ultimately what you're doing. So, I do a lot of polyphenols in my diet, a lot of omega-3s, things like that are all lots of antioxidants here and
Yes.
there.
There's actually a lot of data for antioxidants too. I mean, a lot of this has like biological plausibility, but there's actually studies on antioxidants in terms of mitochondria and egg energy
Yep.
and,
Yep.
in terms of animal and human data and so I really do talk to my patients a lot about that as well.
Yeah, recently I don't know if you've gotten into Dr. Casey Means, but I read her book several months ago when it came out, and it really is just so many times during her book, I was like, Amen, sister. I was like, this is
So good.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I think she just makes it very clear about the mitochondria and the energy source and things like that. So I definitely think that, the changes that we made in our lives for clean living to better my ovarian quality, that was my number one goal in the beginning of it, really led me into this conundrum of, okay, well, it didn't really make my quality of my eggs better because I ultimately didn't use my own egg for the child that I'm carrying now. But I do feel like my longevity, my health span, all of that has been significantly increased. And, like you look at some of the labs that you get tested, I'm 42 years old and all my testing is, I would say, under the Casey Means normal, because that is not the normal that is on your lab test when you get at an annual wellness exam.
Correct. Yeah.
So, and I mean, I think that the clean living really has impacted our lives in that regard. And there's, and clean living doesn't just apply to our what we put on our skins and what we put in our bodies, but it's also about mindset. And we briefly talked about this before we press record. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about, from a coaching and REI perspective, how much does mindset and more of like a spiritual work happen in your clients, your patients
Uh,
through the journey?
that's such a beautiful question. I love your perspective. What I tell my patients, and I'm also very spiritually led and driven, and I tell my patients that there's this sweet spot. You have to believe enough that it is possible, right? And that happens to us because we get shut down with all the bad
Mhm.
news and all the
Mhm.
negative tests. We're like,
Mhm.
no, it's not possible. Like the door has to be cracked, because we got to believe it's possible. And then we have to let go of the outcome. That is the hardest thing to do. And if you look at like 12 steps or any major spiritual discipline, it's like in that letting go and that turning it over to a higher power that is so powerful. And so I've had patients, walk in the room to do an embryo transfer. Dr. Bove, I'm telling you, this isn't going to work. And then with
Mm.
love, I say let's do some breathing. Like, let me give you a hug. Like, what can
Right.
we do that you believe it's possible? Because if you're telling me with 100% certainty it's not going to work, I promise you,
It's not going to
your
work.
your uterus is going to shut down. Your energetic fields. We don't talk about the energetic body at all. That is so
Mhm.
involved in receptivity and openness to this process. And we don't know exactly the effects of stress. We don't know exactly, but that closed offness, it doesn't help for sure, right? Nothing is
Sure.
100%. I just say this process is a whole series of vectors, and we want every single vector possible in alignment to allow this to happen. And the mindset is actually a really big piece of that. And hey, it
Mhm.
probably does lower cortisol levels. It probably does some of those scientific things that we know about. And plus, it just
Right.
feels better. It just
Yeah,
feels better
right.
to go about your day and to kind of have this sort of peace that, like, you know I can trust myself. Like, there's going to be a pathway to parenthood for me. Like, all
Mhm.
will be well. Cause I think it's like on the other side, but what if this doesn't happen? What if that doesn't happen? What if I don't become a parent? I say, listen, every single person who wants to become a parent is going to become a parent. It may not be your strong plan A, right? You will become
Yeah.
an awesome parent. You just got to stick with the process, trust your doctor, trust your coach, lean in, pray, let go, whatever your
Right. Right.
process
Right.
is. But I really think it's all of it. It's not just one thing. And that's why I actually named my practice Love and Science, because I think it actually takes both.
Yeah.
So
No, I totally agree.
I'm sure that you did a lot of, like, your mindset evolved, right? I'm sure throughout your fertility journey. Can you say a little bit about what you know now and what you learned that maybe you wish you could tell yourself, that sort of younger version of yourself when you were
Sure.
first starting this process?
Yeah, no, I have a lot to say on that. And it's such a good question. It's such a good topic that so many people have, asked me about, that are at that crossroads saying, do I go donor egg or do I go through a whole another cycle of IVF? And really uh, whenever I first went in to do those labs that you talked about, the REI I sat down with, the first time like I ever sat down and went over labs with her, she said, if you want to have a baby and carry a baby, you should probably just go to donor egg. And that just crushed me. I
Yeah.
think that is oftentimes spoken way too soon in a conversation. And maybe that's just like what I heard. And maybe she said other things at the same
Right.
time. But to people that are out there listening, when you're in that similar situation, that is the only thing you're going to hear. And it's going to be devastating to hear it because it is, again, that whole I can work to accomplish X, Y, and Z. Why can I work and accomplish this to have my own egg, use it? And then I kind of went through this phase where it was denial.
Yeah.
It was denial because it was no, like I've proven this. I've fought adversities before. Like I can do this. And
Mhm.
so it was like, and of course you hear all these stories. Oh, well, such and such just stopped trying and they got pregnant. That can happen to you. Why don't you just stop trying and then it would happen? And so, I kind of fooled myself to believe, oh, well, okay, we're gonna stop trying, then it's gonna happen. And so I kind of went through different phases of emotions. And then I ultimately realized that I had to grieve not having my own genetic child. And when I went through the process of that grief, it was big. And a lot of people, even now, they are going through it and they can't see past not having genetics passed on to their child. And really what I had to come to the conclusion was I knew I was going to be a mother. I had no doubt. I had the desire in my heart. And as Rosanna Austin, my fertility coach, says, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there for a reason. You're going to be a mom.
Yes.
And so, really, I had to go through this process of why am I trying to be God in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I trying to direct how my baby is going to come into this world? And I truly believe we see time as like a here's now, here was the future, and here was the past. But God, universe, source, sees things as a collective. And our baby's soul was in that collective. And
Yes.
our baby, what if our baby was like, I don't want to come into to the world that way that you are trying to force me to come into that world.
Yeah.
And I had to get on the same page with what the meaning, what the just the purpose of this fertility journey. What was it doing in my life? What doors was it closing? What doors was it opening? The people I was meeting, the incredible opportunity that I get to share with other people, fertility and clean living now.
Mm-hmm.
Just so different that I would have never gotten to do if we would have had this baby the way I intended to have this baby.
Great.
And then just really accepting, receiving science and love from this child that this is how he wanted to come to us.
Mm.
And, and I remember talking to my sister-in-law. She's a social worker, so she like processes things just so straightforward and has just been, a big rock in talking me through a lot of these things. She's like, you're gonna know when you're gonna have to go to donor egg.
Mm.
Don't force it. Everybody's different, and you're gonna know, okay, this is when my time is, and I trust the process of, and you're going to be grateful for the process.
Mhm.
When you get to that point, then that area in your life, you're going to receive your baby. And it really was powerful because I really had to, and a lot of people ask me on social media, like, how many times did you go through IVF before you decided to go to donor egg? And I tell people, I'm like, it is different for everyone.
Yeah.
And you can't put a number on the times that you want to go through IVF before you go to donor egg. It has got to be a personal reception of the process that you just receive that science is amazing. Like, I'm so grateful that I have this opportunity that I can actually carry a child that is not my DNA, and I get to raise this child that is going to be our baby.
That's right. And also epigenetics too. I mean,
Oh
that's
yeah,
fascinating.
epigenetics. Yeah. And then
You
I
know
mean,
that, yeah.
a lot of people get attached to epigenetics, sometimes too, is just like, like, yes, the baby will change. I have a friend who she has a donor egg baby, and it is so crazy because she has this like gap in between her teeth. And
Yeah.
her baby has, like, the little girl has a
That's
gap in
amazing.
between her teeth. I'm like, that is just so cool. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even understand it, but it's just,
Yeah.
it's so precious, you know?
It is. And you're right. I mean, I think stepping back to realize this is about a soul. This is about housing a soul. This is about parenting a soul. And what's that pathway going to be? And, it's a process. And I think that all of infertility is grief. right?
Yeah.
I think that if we think about it, thinking about the different stages and grief is nonlinear and all those things, like we are not taught as humans, and you probably see this in your work as a trauma surgeon. We are not taught how to process grief. We are taught to
Mm.
numb our feelings.
Mm.
We're taught to distract ourselves. We're not taught
Yeah.
about, bargaining or acceptance or, it's not even okay to feel sad, oh no,
Right.
like make yourself feel better. But sometimes you need to sit in the sadness and let those emotions, I mean, grief
Mhm.
is hard.
Yeah.
The only way through grief is through grief. There's no like, I'm going to take this like side back road exit and then I'm going to end up on the other side. Like it does this profound work, right, on us, but it's necessary work for us to be able to move on forward. And
Yeah.
so I guess how would you sort of what would you say to somebody who is like afraid of those strong feelings? Because I always say no feeling's going to kill you, but like it might be
Right.
pretty tough in the meantime. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because, I get that I get those questions a lot is like how did I sort of cross over and how did I become okay with using donor egg? And I would say um I always ask the person asking me like what is your intent in having this baby? Is it truly you just want to replicate your genetics in this human population? Is that it? And most people, when they think about it like that, they're like, no, like I want to be a mom. Like
Yeah.
I want to be able to raise this little one to have the values and the goal, like I want to set them up. I want to love on them. I want to be able to put a good human out into the world. Well, all those different qualities don't necessarily need you to pass your genetics on to that child.
Right.
And if you're like, and I had to really, tell myself, like, I need to let go of the how. I need to let go of the how. Like, how do we get there? It doesn't matter. Like, you're going to be a mom. You're going to, like, and it's interesting is like through the process, I was almost more okay with adopting than doing donor egg. And then after I thought about it after a while, I was like, no, like how lucky am I that I can actually have the opportunity to carry
Yeah.
a child and be able to, participate in this. So I would say, what's your goal in having a child?
Yeah.
And if it is just to have your own genetics in this world to pass on, then maybe you need some self-reflection and some ego coaching because that is your ego speaking.
Yeah.
Um, I would say, like what in you? Like there's got to be something in your past, like shame, guilt of letting go of the how. Like,
Mhm.
like join Facebook groups, join other communities that are talking about other moms that are having donor egg babies, donor embryo babies, growing their family in different ways than just sort of the culturistic natural way of doing things.
Yeah.
There are so many people that are having donor egg and donor embryo babies that we're just not even talking about it as
I
much.
know.
And I feel like people that are in this situation who don't want to move forward, they're feeling alone.
Yeah.
And if they felt like they had more people to support them, more people, and I've had them say, well, is this kid gonna resent me? Is this kid gonna, this, that, and the other? Well, I mean, if you look at the history of adopted children, you know, I know several adopted friends, and I don't think there's a lot of resentment to their parents.
No, no. I'm actually in the process of compiling a group of books for children, at different ages.
Oh,
If you
nice.
find a list that's already been started, let me know. I
Sure.
tend not to reinvent the wheel, but I've been getting this question so many times from moms who are like, I just want to, be able to help with the narrative, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's really important too, because I think if we think these things through, it's like, our narrative is our narrative, right? You sort of, it's what's in your heart. We loved you so much, right? That we wanted to have you so much. And this was our pathway to having you. Like I think it's super powerful to think about the fact that it's a story of love. It's a love story.
Right. Right. It totally is. It totally is.
Yeah.
And once you make the decision, and I will say, just for people who are out there that are trying to decide and you make the decision to use donor egg, it's not easy after you make the decision.
No.
There's still a lot of steps that you have to go through in order to get to the fertilized eggs, to the transfers, to, the next steps, to carrying the pregnancy and all those things.
Choosing a donor. Choosing
Yeah,
a donor is
choosing a
hard.
donor. We went through 6 different donors before we got to our 7th one. And this
Wow.
was, really, digging deep, and maybe I'm just like, like I wanted their whole charts. I wanted their family
Yeah.
practice visits. And that's important. It's been recently talked about is,
Yeah.
like how that should be available
100%.
for intended parents. But I will say also is, and I tell this to my coaching clients just about other things in life, but if you think about having your baby, I know this is like so simple to think about, but we all use Amazon.
Yeah.
And if I place an order on Amazon, I say, buy now, it's mine, right? So that thing is coming to me. Now, I don't know if you can't select if FedEx is going to bring it to you, UPS, Amazon carrier, USPS. There's all kinds of different ways that package will get to you. And surely the timing of that is going to be very different based on where it's coming from and all these different things. But when you decide that you are going to be a mother, you've pressed the buy now button.
That's right.
And you have got to stick that in your mind, whether it be affirmations, meditation, prayer, centering, that baby is on its way to you.
That's right. That is so powerful. That's right. And we talk about manifestation and allowing.
Yeah.
This is like, it's like that visioning, it is happening. It is happening. And
Yep.
I am, co-creating, right, with this greater universe, this greater power.
Right.
Wow. That's amazing. Can I ask you a question I get asked by my clients, and I don't have a great answer, and my patients too. And so this concept of disloyalty. And so I've heard it on both sides, like, oh, my husband just can't imagine his sperm combining with another woman's egg. He feels like that's infidelity. Like I've heard that more times than I can count. I've also heard on the other side, it's disloyal to myself to give up on my own DNA. And, I listen, I validate, this has not been my exact journey,
Sure.
so it's a little harder. What would you say to those people where that is their primary barrier, is this sort of notion that they're doing something wrong by making that choice?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a couple of things. So my husband and I had to discuss this at length, when we were trying to go through the journey, because you could use donor embryo. And
Right.
for people that don't know the difference between donor egg and donor embryo out there, donor egg is, we had a donor that just donated her egg. I mean, we paid for it. And then my husband's sperm fertilized it. Well, we could have gone the other route, is to look for donor embryos that were already fertilized with someone else's eggs, someone else's sperm. So the question about disloyalty, I think it comes down to, it's a couple specific things. So it has to come down to, how does your spouse feel about having their sperm long-term joined with an egg that is not you, and you raising that child? I think it's perfectly okay if they're like, I'm not good with that. And then, maybe their next option is donor embryo. I think we came to the conclusion, and I had to come to this too, is like, if we have a little girl, And then what if there is something that we find out later in life that was genetic in my infertility pathway that I then passed on to her? So, I mean, I kind of like that helped me to let go of that genetic passing on too, because why do I want to continue this generational thing?
That's right.
Um, but I think that's a couple decision. And I don't feel like it's dishonest or disloyal. I just feel like it's something that, it's another choice. Now, for me, giving up on my own genetics, I don't know. I think that was part of the grieving process, and the disloyalty to myself. I had to see that that was maybe egotistic.
It's a thought. Coaching would say that's a thought.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just a thought, and it wasn't something that was going to change the way we directed our goals, our actions, and our outcomes. It's really, it was just, I think a lot of decisions these days, we rely so much on our ego,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't rely on the divine presence that's trying to work through us,
That's
in
right.
us and through us, to make connections and love one another, and things like that. We let our ego get in the way, and then our ego makes our decisions. And so I mean, it comes with time, time and practice, and you can't expect fertility warriors just to, listen to this podcast and decide, oh yeah, I'm gonna not think about the loyalty to my DNA, but it's got to come with a practice of mindfulness and
Yeah.
recentering to, just gratitude, abundance, all those things that are in
Yeah.
this present moment, that are here for you now, that you're going to miss out on if you don't just wake up and smell the roses right here.
That's right. And that combined with, and grief is the pathway through.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
if you can grieve it, then you can go
totally.
through and
Yeah,
and release those attachments and say, okay, I'm here for it, whatever form that
yeah,
takes. That
totally.
acceptance. I accept this will and my will are now united, right?
Right.
So
And I always say, grief, and like terrible grief, is normal,
yeah.
but it's not always necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you have to do? You have to make steps, you have to take actions, and you have autonomy to make those decisions, to connect with others, to get a coach, to do this, to make that grief a little less painful for you.
That's right. Oh, thank you.
Ah.
I feel like we could talk for hours about this. And
I
I'm I'm
know. I feel like we
I'm
could
so
too.
grateful that, I mean, your journey and, you're now with child and,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's just like I always say, life is strange and beautiful all at the same time. It's
Right?
like, could you ever have like, predicted this, but it's like, this is your life and, here you are and continuing to use your voice, continuing to advocate, continuing to connect with other women, other people. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes we just realize that like our they call it the wounded healer, right? Like sometimes our deepest pains in life are connected with how we're meant to heal the world. And I think
Yeah.
you're a living example of that.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you. So
Well,
if people have heard this and they haven't really heard of us yet, your listeners and my listeners, where
yeah.
can people find you, Dr. Guidry?
Okay, so I have Instagram. It's Whole Body Optimism, and you could just go to Instagram at Whole Body Optimism. Look me up, give me a follow, come and comment or message me. I'm happy to connect in any way possible. You can go to my website too, easywholebodyoptimism.com, and find me there too. So tell my listeners, how do they get in touch with you?
Very parallel. So the most comprehensive place is my website, loveandsciencefertility.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook under Love and Science Fertility. I love a DM. I love a comment. I also have, this podcast. And so I think we should all follow each other's podcasts. The world's a better place with inspiring podcasts as we drive, as we do our laundry, as we, there's always room for inspiration. So I loved connecting with you today. And I know this is really the beginning of a very fruitful collaboration and friendship.
Totally. I love it. It was awesome.
Thank you. Until the next time.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Love and Science podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. If you found this conversation valuable, if you could please rate, review, and share this podcast with your trusted people, it would mean so much to me. If you want more tools to help you navigate the fertility journey, please book a discovery call with me today. The link is in the show notes. Please do not let infertility have the final word. I'm here to take the burden from you so that you can achieve your goal of building your family. In gratitude, this is Dr. Erica Bove. I'm rooting for you always.